Hey everyone, today we're diving into a remarkable intersection of medicine and technology where your phone could become a window into your lungs. My guest is Dr. Bipin Patel. He's the CEO and founder of ElectronRx, a Cambridge-based company redefining how chronic respiratory diseases are monitored and managed. They're about to launch PDX, a new app that uses the sensors in your phone, your tablet, or your laptop to measure key cardiopulmonary functions. Things like heart rate, breathing rate, tidal volume, all without having to use any special hardware. We're going to talk about how this tech came about and what it means for patients living with conditions like asthma or COPD, and what's next as PDX makes its debut at Health 2025 in Las Vegas. Good morning, or in your case, good evening, Dr. Patel. Thank you for being here. For starters, I would love to know what was the spark that led to the creation of Electron RX and now PDX. Was there a particular patient story or a gap in care that inspired it? The reason I ask is that usually most of these new technologies, developments, and inventions come about because there was a need and somebody said, I have to do something about it.
Good question, Alex. I have to go back many years. The spark was around the opportunities that existed with new technologies coming together 6, 7 years ago, which said, look, we could potentially take vast amount of information and make some sense from it. So we were looking at, and still are in the mix of neuromodulation. So looking into the way electrical signals travel back and forth from the brain, innervate various organs, including the heart and the lungs. So the question then became, can we potentially intercept these signals and make some sense out of them to predict, to potentially modulate the way these organs behave? And from that point onwards, you can't really go around implanting devices into people. So the opportunity was, can we look at the way heart and the lungs function from an external perspective, the phenotypic observations you can make by looking into using optical signals, acoustic signals, motion, and the mobile phone, as you and I very well know, a super powerful computer that's sitting in the backs of pockets of billions of people. So could we utilize the existing sensors that are sitting in there, of which there's a multitude of them now, and take it from there? So we arrived at today where we're looking at respiratory functions, cardiac functions, but we're heavily leaning into the respiratory space by essentially using the phone, using the existing sensors that are on there to extract what are meaningful physiological signals, which are indicative of how your lungs are functioning, if I can put it in that particular way. So that's where we arrived at. And then that was where the sparks are. And then the driver really for us is, I can talk about congestive obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, of which there are 550 million patients on the planet, several hundred million not diagnosed. And then asthma, I'm told that there are close to 900 million people on the planet with respiratory disorders. So the issues here are to do with you don't really end up in the clinic until you're pretty ill, and there are several years of delays in diagnosis. Um, so the way I look at it, and the rest of the team looks at it with all the clinicians around us, is why not try and identify the risk these patients are carrying at much earlier points in time, and therefore allow interventions to happen much earlier, and therefore you're not suffering for years on end until somebody diagnoses you. So pulmonary arterial hypertension, I understand, interstitial lung disease, there's several years that go by before you get diagnosed because the pathways are quite complex, it's expensive, there are false positives, there are false negatives in there. And if you had a mechanism by which you can monitor and track somebody's respiratory health, respiratory patterns, as you and I very much know about patterns, and everybody else probably on the listening panel here. AI is available that can tell the difference between a cat and a dog now, as you very well know. Classic examples. You want to be in a position to tell if somebody's pattern of breathing signatures are deteriorating or improving. It's more likely deteriorating or there's an abnormality there. I'm speaking too much now.
No, no,
That's
no,
that's
please.
that's a very long answer to a question, but it's a very interesting question you've asked me. So I've gone off and tell you that's what drives me, gets me out of bed every morning.
I really find it interesting because we've seen how the digital health tools available to people, such as wearables and the sensors on phones, have gotten better with time. And the way that a lot of these new applications work would be akin to just sticking your ear to the door and from the noises outside, guess if it's a dog or a cat. And we have very, very sensitive sensors now on our phones, and we have good AI capabilities, some of them in the cloud, a lot of them on the phones themselves. What made you aware that we are at a point where you can start creating and developing applications such as PDX in the sense that we've come to a point where the sensors are good enough, the AI is good enough? What triggered that for you to say, this is when we're going to start working on it?
Brilliant question, Alex. Look, the game that we're in, we're a deep tech startup. So I'm sure you've interviewed lots of entrepreneurs and founders already. So look, the issue is the following. I think you know that there is a unmet need out there, unmet clinical need. You know that you can generate the solution through the various sensors you have. The sensors are good enough. They've been good enough for multiple years, actually. And I think the PDX thing has come about because the recent advances in all the AI that you and I are now becoming very familiar with. The last 18 months has accelerated the process, compressed the timelines to levels where I couldn't have possibly imagined it. And hence we've come about this place. But I think there are other challenges, you know. You have a tool, but you've made a very good way of putting it together, a metaphor of putting your ear to the door and listening to all this noise and trying to figure out what is exactly being said in a room full of 50 people. And you're trying to listen to some friends who are in far left-hand side corner somewhere at 3 o'clock or something on the clock. And that's where they are. So I think the challenge actually is more to do with, I don't think it's a technology anymore. It's not the technology anymore. Can we get it out there? Can you find a beat a path to the patients? In fact, can the patient beat a path to what you think you've created? And there's an awful lot of stuff that goes on between that point, from having the solution to getting it into the hands of the people. Now, I think because there are 7 billion mobile phones on the planet, um, in the hands of the big seven corporates that we have out there, the Googles, the Metas, the Amazons. They can press a button and all of these things could be easily available on a mobile phone. Basically, you've turned it into a medical device now. But I'm not telling you anything that you don't know about and the audience. So I guess I am trying to articulate the issue around, I think the challenges are to do with the beating a path to the patient or the user. That's the challenge.
Another challenge that I see companies like yours facing is, since you're turning the camera data into health diagnostics and you're using machine learning not just to do what you do, but to improve its accuracy over time. How do you balance the speed with which you're trying to beat a path to the patient and the speed of innovation with a need for not just regulatory approval, but also medical validation, which has been kind of a
Yes.
challenge for a lot of previous efforts?
I think, Alex, yeah, a third very good question. Obviously, I've not paid you any money to ask me these questions, just for the audience to know that. Um, Look, you have the technical validation. So the machinery has to work and it needs to do what we said we would do. And then there's the clinical validation, which is another piece of the jigsaw. So once you've technically validated it, which you've gone through the regulatory process, you have now establish some sort of a claim that, it's a blue box and it's of this size and that dimension. That's exactly what it is. So you need to now go out there, and who wants to use it? Can people use it? Is there a reason why it's blue? Why does it have six corners? All this sort of stuff. Now, I think there's the clinical validation. Once that comes, then I believe, and I think I just don't believe it, the big corporates as well, all of them, because they have the power and they are the custodians of the patients and the problem, the clinical unmet needs. They have the ability to go and distribute it and put it in the market, because they need to work out, is there a business case and is there a business model from which they can make money and survive? So I'm afraid it's quite a complicated issue here. I think there's a lot of solutions, for ourselves. Look, if I can get this into what I'm told as a winter crisis we have in the United Kingdom, which is to do with patients with respiratory challenges end up in A&E, and as a result, they'll end up in the hospital bed for multiple number of days, which means the system is all getting clogged up now. And hence we have waiting lists, and we have so-called winter crisis, which happens every year because the temperatures change, people have exacerbations. Now, if you can identify those people before they get there, several day -3, day -7, you could do something about it. These patients probably require some sort of steroid treatment. They need antibiotics to prevent them exacerbating and getting in. But the problem, Alex, is who is actually the owner of this problem, and who wants to save these people from ending up in A&E? I'm afraid this is where the problem lies. We could save quite a few lives at this point, but the system doesn't allow it. So you've got to hang around to really get it technically validated, clinically validated, and that's a number of years out into the future. So I think the advent of AI is compressed the timelines to the possibilities we can create, but the regulations and the way the commerce and the business machinery works is slowing it down, I think. But that's what it is, Because if you think about this right now, if I asked you a question, how many people use ChatGTP or Perplexity, and I've asked to put the symptoms in, and it pops out the answer. The answer, I'm afraid, most of the time is quite right. So what's it doing? It's giving you an answer which is quite correct most of the time. Yes, there are flaws in it. And how many times does a doctor get it right in the first place? That's the challenge. I'm afraid we're here. We've got stuff available.
Now, looking into the future, let's we have to take into account that a lot of the things that we take for granted on our smartphones, like speakers, microphone, camera, voice
Yes,
commands, and
yes.
so on, they are already present in other devices around our home. How close do you think we are to a world where not just your phone, but your devices around you in your home, in your work, perform daily or even more often health checks integrated with your care team? And where do you see the challenge of keeping that information safe so that it's not used against you?
Brilliant, Alex. So you and I know the phone is tracking all our movements. It's got all the details. Google has all this information. Amazon has the information through Alexa and Apple, whatever they use. I can't remember. Um, so they are monitoring our voice. They are monitoring our movements. They are monitoring our keyboard movements. So the richness of evidence and information on an individual level is already there. The question then becomes, how do these big organizations head off towards the direction of healthcare and delivering genuine healthcare? But they are not quite there yet. They don't want to be there because they're crossing over the line into the regulatory space. These are consumer-orientated organizations. So I think it's already here. They're already listening to you and me coughing, and from that you can capture whether you are having some sort of an infection being built up. Um, you already have vast amount of information heading off into the direction using the Pixel Watch and the Google Watch and Apple Watches and all the rest of it. So they already have vast amount of info. you can predict somebody having a stroke or going to have a risk of a stroke. You're going to have the ability to predict. You already have it already. I think the question mark is, at what point in time does Google and Apple feel that they are ready to unleash the knowledge they have already in the system and become medical device companies or clinical, essentially clinicians, if you really think about this. It's a screening tool on a massive scale, massive scale.
Yeah, as long as
I'm
it's
sure I'm not telling you
screening.
anything you don't know about. Lots of people will
No, I
agree with this.
mean,
That's what we know.
it's good to hear it from the source. I read about it all the time, but it's nice to talk to somebody who's in the trenches, so to speak. If you could change one misconception about digital health and how these devices work and so on, because as many people you've mentioned use not just ChatGPT, but other resources to quote unquote do their own research and sometimes get things wrong because they don't have the background and so on.
Yes, yes,
And these devices can help prevent some of that
yes.
misinformation from going about. If you could change one misconception that a lot of people have about digital health, what would it be?
So, Alex, before I answer that question, I need you to help me define the word misconception about a lot of people having. Tell
Things
me
that
what
people
it.
think about, for example, you know how people usually complain about big pharma or big medical wanting to get you or for example, you mentioned how companies like Meta or Amazon or whatever are listening to you all the time. They are, but not in the way that most people think. There's a lot
Okay,
more. Yeah.
I think there's an awful lot more, guys. So
Mm.
I think the look, you have the information source, but you then need to convert it into an actionable insight or an actionable foresight. To do that, you genuinely need to understand what that information means. So it's voice pattern or your keyboard strokes or your heart rates, but you need to go through the mechanics. So I think you need the appropriate algorithms or the formulae to extract the meaningful clinical evidence that relates back to the condition or the potential risk that you may be carrying. So there's an awful lot to go, actually. So yes, they have all this data points, but it's not really going to get there yet. So I think yes, there is a misconception that they know about these things. They probably don't. They haven't quite got there yet. They don't have the active programs. Maybe they've done the not maybe, I believe they have done the odd experiment or two, but it takes an awful lot of shifting and heavy lifting to really get these things into the market. So if you think about the effort that Apple has gone to, the effort that Fitbit has gone to, the Pixel Watch, they all contain what looks like a medical device. In fact, it is a medical device in there that measures ECG, and it actually does tell you, and they use medical language that says you are in sinus rhythm or not. And but it does say if you're feeling unwell, go and talk to your doctor. I am not giving you any advice. So they're not really doing anything yet, but they are extremely on the edges of what they do. So I think there is a misconception. They don't know. They're not there yet. I think we've got some distance to go yet because the regulations are very tight and it's an uphill struggle. And there are lots of rules and regulations in place and lots of checks, lots of guardrails to prevent these solutions going out there into the wild when they can misinform essentially and put patients at risk. Sorry,
Thank you.
that's
No,
that's
no,
that's.
I totally understand where you're coming from, and I certainly hope to be a part of this journey. Maybe a few months from now, you can come back and let us know how the show went and how the
Love
application
to,
is
Alex.
doing, and maybe talk to us about what the different benefits have been for the patients that have been trying out these applications and how the data from these patients also helps improve the next generation of devices and so on.
I think so. I think just in the dying seconds, I guess I was going to say, look, I think these devices that are being constructed now, which, if we use the word digital health, the digital information allows the patient to be empowered because it's around that individual. They get to learn more about themselves and more about themselves as time goes on. So this is longitudinal information, which says your trajectory of your health, if we can think of it that way, put it in a global sense, is moving in one direction or the other. And therefore, it gives you the opportunity to do something about it. I think it's empowerment, personally. That's how I see it.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what
not
people
just for
do,
the
right?
patient, but also for the medical personnel, even for
Absolutely.
governments making decisions on where
Absolutely.
to
Absolutely.
invest.
I think it's positive stuff. It's
Mhm.
positive stuff, but we do have vast volumes of stuff to get through. It's not easy.
Definitely. Well, thank you again, Dr. Bipin Patel from Electron RX. He's shared today how digital biomarkers and mobile technology are transforming respiratory care. You can learn more about PDX and its debut at Health 2025 at electronrx.com. As always, we'll keep following the story of how innovation and data are helping people breathe easier, literally and figuratively. I'm Alex Newman, and this has been Vida Digital, in English this time. Stay tuned and stay curious.